What does the world's most recognized tech billionaire have in common with nuclear weapons scientists and national security officials? More than you might think. A document dump obtained by Breitbart News and published on August 2, 2026, reveals that Bill Gates, co-founder of Microsoft and one of the most influential private citizens on the planet, held a top-secret Q clearance from the United States Department of Energy for 7 consecutive years. During this period, gain-of-function virus research became one of the most controversial and closely monitored fields in science. While a global pandemic changed human civilization, the Department of Energy will not explain why he had it. That silence deserves scrutiny. That silence demands answers. Welcome back to Red Fence. Today we are going to walk through everything we know, everything we don't, and everything the government should be compelled to tell the American public about Bill Gates' access to some of the most sensitive secrets this country holds. Let's get into it. Before we go any further, we need to establish exactly what a Q clearance is, because it is not a standard background check. It is not a routine government credential, and it is not the kind of thing that gets handed out casually. The Q clearance is the highest level of security clearance issued by the United States Department of Energy. It grants access to restricted data, a legal category that includes nuclear weapons design specifications, nuclear material production data, classified intelligence about nuclear capabilities, and other information directly tied to national security at the most sensitive level. To put that in plain terms, Q clearance holders can legally access information about how America's nuclear arsenal is built, where it is maintained, and how it functions. This is not a classification level designed for tech entrepreneurs. It is not a courtesy badge extended to philanthropists. Historically, it has been held by nuclear physicists, weapons engineers, senior intelligence officials, and government contractors with direct operational roles in national security programs. The clearance process itself is exhaustive. It involves extensive background investigations, financial record reviews, foreign contact disclosures, psychological evaluations in some cases, and ongoing monitoring. It is not fast and it is not simple. So, when we learn that a private citizen who holds no government office, no elected position, and no publicly acknowledged role within the DOE's national security apparatus held this clearance for 7 years, the obvious and necessary question is, why? What legitimate purpose required Bill Gates to have access to information at that level? The story originates from a document dump first reported by Breitbart News on August 2, 2026. The documents reveal that Gates held the Q clearance for a period of 7 years, a timeline that the reporting makes clear overlaps significantly with the COVID-19 pandemic and the period of most intense public debate over gain-of-function research. The Ground News article aggregating coverage of this story notes that 7 outlets have picked it up: Breitbart, The Blaze, Zero Hedge, Conservative Review, USA News, News Target, and Matsav. Every single one leans right. As of the time of this recording, not one mainstream outlet, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not CNN, not NBC, not NPR has touched it. We will come back to that media landscape in a moment because it matters. But first, let us be precise about what the documents actually show. According to the reporting, the documents confirm that Gates held the clearance. What they do not fully explain, and what the Department of Energy refuses to clarify, is the operational basis for it. What did he access? Who authorized it? Under what program, project, or agreement was the clearance granted? What oversight mechanisms were applied? None of those questions have been answered. The DOE has remained silent. That silence is itself a data point. Context matters enormously here, so let's place this on a timeline. Gates held the clearance for 7 years, during a period when gain-of-function research deliberately making pathogens more transmissible or deadly became a major topic of debate in American science policy and public health. It overlaps with the period in which the NIH, under the leadership of Francis Collins, and NIAID, under Anthony Fauci, were funding and overseeing research with direct implications for pathogen enhancement. Research conducted in part at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, which has remained at the center of debates about the origins of COVID-19. It overlaps with the emergence and global spread of SARS-CoV-2, a pandemic that killed millions, destabilized economies, and prompted extraordinary expansions of government authority. and it overlaps with a period in which Bill Gates himself became one of the most prominent and outspoken voices in global pandemic preparedness, vaccine development, and public health policy. He testified before governments shaped policy recommendations through the Gates Foundation and committed billions of dollars to vaccine programs and pandemic response infrastructure. Does any of that prove wrongdoing? It does not. But what it does unambiguously is raise questions that any responsible government institution should be required to answer, publicly on the record with documentation. The overlap between a private citizen's access to the DOE's highest classification tier and the most consequential public health crisis in a century is not a coincidence to be dismissed. It is a question to be pursued. For listeners who are less familiar with the scientific and policy debates surrounding gain-of-function research, let's define it clearly. Gain-of-function research refers to scientific experiments in which a pathogen, typically a virus, is deliberately modified to gain new or enhanced properties. That might mean making a virus more transmissible between humans, more resistant to treatment, or more lethal upon infection. The scientific rationale for this research is pandemic preparedness. Proponents argue that by engineering dangerous variants in controlled laboratory settings, scientists can develop vaccines and countermeasures before natural evolution produces those variants in the wild. The counterargument is direct. You are creating pathogens that do not exist in nature, making them more dangerous, and trusting that laboratory security protocols will prevent an accidental or deliberate release. Given what we know about the frequency of laboratory accidents, that is a significant bet. This debate became public and political in a high-profile way during the exchanges between Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky and Dr. Anthony Fauci before the Senate Health Committee. Paul pressed Fauci repeatedly on whether NIH funds were used to support gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Fauci denied it under oath. Subsequent document releases and NIH admissions complicated that position substantially. As of August 2026, Fauci has been voted in contempt of Congress by Senator Rand Paul's Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee following 111 pleas of the Fifth Amendment during sworn testimony. His Covadero phone has been obtained by Senate investigators. Florida has subpoenaed him. Criminal contempt referrals are under discussion. The broader context, in other words, is one of institutional accountability being actively contested. Into that context in which the government's handling of gain-of-function oversight is already under serious legal and legislative pressure. We now have confirmation that one of the world's most influential private funders of global health programs had the highest DOE security clearance for 7 years, and no explanation has been offered for why. Let's talk about the Department of Energy's response, or more precisely, the absence of one. According to the reporting, the Department of Energy has declined to explain the basis for Gates' clearance. No statement has been issued. No official has gone on record. The documents reveal the fact of the clearance. The institution that granted it has chosen not to explain its reasoning. In a functioning system of democratic accountability, this is not acceptable. The Q clearance is not a private credential. It is issued by a federal agency of the United States government. Its authorization, scope, and duration are matters of public accountability, not because classified operational details should be disclosed, but because the American public has a legitimate interest in knowing who has access to its most sensitive national security information and why. If a private citizen without a clear legal role, Senate confirmation, or official government duties keeps a clearance for 7 years, the government should explain why. That explanation may not need to go to the press, but it does need to go to Congress, to oversight groups, and through them to the public. The DOE's silence invites the obvious inference that the explanation is something the department is not prepared to defend. That may be unfair. There may be a legitimate classified explanation that cannot be publicly disclosed. But in the absence of any explanation, even a general one, silence functions as an obstacle to accountability. And accountability is not a partisan issue. It is a structural requirement of democratic governance. Let's be precise about what access at the Q clearance level could theoretically include. Restricted data under the Atomic Energy Act, the category that Q clearance unlocks, covers nuclear weapons design information, materials production, deployment considerations, and related intelligence. It is a broader category than most people assume. It is not limited to bomb schematics. It encompasses the full architecture of America's nuclear capabilities. Now, no credible reporting suggests Gates was accessing nuclear weapons design files. That is not the claim being made here. But the question is structural. When a civilian holds clearance at this level, the oversight framework matters enormously. What exactly was accessed? Under what program? What were the logging and audit requirements? Who reviewed his access? Was it renewed annually? Was it reviewed at all? These are not paranoid questions. They are the standard questions any serious oversight body should ask about any Q clearance holder, regardless of who they are. Another important point is that the DOE does more than manage nuclear weapons. Its national labs also research topics like energy, climate science, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and biology. These areas overlap with Gates' main interests, such as pandemic preparedness, energy transition, and global health. This is not trivial. That is not an accusation. It is an observation that merits investigation. Let's address the media dimension directly, because it tells us something important. As noted earlier, this story has been covered exclusively by right-leaning outlets. Breitbart broke it. The Blaze, Zero Hedge, Conservative Review, USSA News, News Target, and Matzav followed. Not one centrist or left-leaning publication has run the story as of this recording. There are two ways to interpret that. The first interpretation is the one critics will offer, that this is a story being circulated in a right-wing media ecosystem prone to amplifying narratives that are hostile to figures like Gates and Fauci, and that the absence of mainstream coverage reflects a reasonable editorial judgment about the story's credibility or newsworthiness. The second interpretation is more troubling, that a factual document dump revealing a senior private citizen's access to classified national security information has been ignored by the institutions whose stated purpose is to hold power accountable. Both interpretations deserve honest consideration. What is not defensible is the assumption that a story's political provenance determines its validity. Document dumps are either authentic or they are not. Security clearances either exist or they do not. If the documents are real, and as of this recording they have not been disputed or debunked, then the story is real. And a story about an unelected private citizen holding top-secret government clearance for 7 years during a global pandemic is, by any reasonable standard, newsworthy. The questions this story raises do not belong to one side of the political spectrum. They belong to anyone who believes that government transparency and accountability are not optional features of democratic governance. Let's be rigorous here. Let's separate what the evidence establishes from what remains unknown. What we know. Bill Gates held a Q clearance, the highest level security clearance issued by the Department of Energy, for a period of 7 years. That period overlaps with the COVID-19 pandemic, the peak of gain-of-function research controversy, and the time during which Gates was among the most active private voices in global health policy. The Department of Energy has not publicly explained the basis for this clearance. Coverage of this story has come exclusively from right-leaning outlets with no mainstream response. What we do not know. The specific dates the clearance was active. What information, if any, Gates accessed under the clearance. Who authorized it and under what program or agreement. Whether the clearance was connected to any specific DOE project, partnership, or consultation. Whether Congress has been briefed, is investigating, or has requested an explanation. The gap between what we know and what we do not know is precisely the space that demands official answers. This is not a fringe concern. A private citizen's access to classified national security information, irrespective of who that citizen is, falls within the legitimate oversight responsibilities of Congress and the executive branch's Inspector General apparatus. The question is whether those mechanisms will be used, and whether the press will care enough to demand it. Here is where we land. The story of Bill Gates' Q clearance is not, at this stage, a story with a resolution. It is a story with a beginning and a very conspicuous silence at its center. What we can say with confidence is this. The disclosure of a 7-year top-secret clearance held by one of the most influential private citizens in the world, during one of the most consequential periods in modern history, is not a matter that should be left to unanswered document dumps and partisan media ecosystems. It demands a formal congressional inquiry. It demands a response from the Department of Energy. It demands the kind of sustained, rigorous investigative attention that stories of this magnitude have historically received, regardless of who is at the center of them. The American public has a right to know why Bill Gates held a Q clearance. The answer may be entirely benign. It may be classified in ways that prevent full public disclosure. But some accounting, even a general one, must be made available through appropriate oversight channels. Follow this story and share it. Ask your representatives to demand answers from the Department of Energy. And stay skeptical not of any particular conclusion, but of any institution on any side that prefers silence to transparency. That's it for this episode. Until next time, keep asking the questions that need to be asked.